I'm just going to start. It's 1:02. How's everybody doing? I hope well. We all just feeling good today? Um, I took the liberty of muting people who were not already on mute. That's not because I don't want to hear from you, but it's just because I thought we might drown out some background noise unless you mean to be speaking. Then you can unmute yourself. Um, so my name is Dan Darling. I'm with the English department in Normandale, and I'm here to present to you on my writing technique for beginning a new novel. So this process is meant to show you like the first initial phases of starting a new and inspiring project. So my hope is that everyone here has either a pen and paper or can type on their computer, because I'm going to guide you through a process and give you space between each step of the process for you to do a little writing, so that by the end of this 50 minutes, maybe you'll have a new novel ready to go, ready to be written. Isn't that exciting? I'm excited about it. Okay, so we have a few steps we're going to go through today. The first goal is we're going to find our inspiration. A lot of times we can find inspiration from our lived experience that can be the basis of a fictional novel. Step 2 is we're going to transform that inspiration into story. Step 3, we're going to find the protagonist who best fits our story. And finally, we're going to write a few what I call scene splashes, where we throw the narrator or the protagonist into these little scenes to see how they work, to start getting a feel for them. That's a way of developing your protagonist sort of in action, which is what I like to do. All right, so let's start with finding our inspiration. There's a lot of different things that move people to write, that move people to create art. I'm going to just run you through a few examples of what moves people so you can start thinking about what moves and inspires you. Amy Tan is one of my favorite novelists. She wrote The Joy Luck Club, and she was inspired by relationships between mothers and daughters. Walter Mosley is another one of my favorites. He wrote this novel called Devil in a Blue Dress, and it is inspired by racial inequality and injustice in the United States. Victor Hugo, has anybody ever read The Hunchback of Notre Dame? You have to. It is so good. It's beautiful. The characters are insane. The plot is perfect. It's a beautiful book. Not many people know that Victor Hugo started this book just because he wanted to capture some of the architecture of Paris in writing. So he was really inspired by the architecture of the cathedral itself, Notre Dame Cathedral. Suzanne Collins, I'm sure many of you have seen or read The Hunger Games, probably both. She was inspired to write by the inequality she saw in our society between rural and urban areas. I'm going to share with you a couple of my books too. My first book, Archaeopteryx, I was inspired by one day I saw on the news that thousands of birds had just spontaneously fallen out of the sky dead. And so that became what moved me into the novel that I wrote. I just finished a different novel, hold on, called Sick at First Sight. And this was inspired by a young woman, probably 13 years old, who I met when I was working as an interpreter on fruit farms in Oregon. And she was this 13-year-old migrant kid, undocumented, who'd been picking fruit her whole life, and her hands were just deformed with arthritis from that. And she just stuck with me, and I've been thinking about her ever since, especially given all of the things we've been seeing about immigration over the last few years and the way that our system treats undocumented people. So these are the few of the things that inspired me and other writers. I would like you to now think about what moves you. And I would like you to just we're going to spend 3 or 4 minutes just doing a little free write about what life experience moves you to create art. I want you to describe it using language that appeals to the 5 senses. So let's all take about 4 minutes and do a little free writing, and hopefully if you capture this inspiration right, it'll move us on to the next stage. All right. Go ahead and finish up the thought you're having, the sentence you're writing, and we'll move on to the next step. So now that we have some inspiration, hopefully, did everybody find something that inspired them? I hope so. I can't see many people, but hopefully there's some nods out there. So next we're going to move on to talking about story. And I'm sure many of you have already studied Freytag's pyramid, but Freytag's pyramid is a way for storytellers to understand the structure and purpose and phases of storytelling. So we're talking about a novel here. That means that this structure is stretched over many pages. And Freytag believed, and I believe, that story is all about conflict. So the structure we're going to look at really is an exploration and diagram of conflict within a novel. So a novel starts off with exposition, or the backstories, before the stuff that happens before the story actually begins. And then we have an inciting incident. This inciting incident begins the conflict. So novels are about conflict. They're explorations of conflict. And the inciting incident is what gets that conflict going. Next comes the rising action sequence, and this is the bulk of the novel. This is hundreds of pages of the novel where these little events happen that slowly escalate this conflict, so it goes up and up and up and up and up until it hits a crisis moment. And that crisis moment is when the opposing forces of the story come together for a climactic moment where somebody wins and somebody loses. Something wins and something loses. And after that, we have a resolution where the story comes to a close, and a denouement, which is sort of like the new normal after the story has occurred. So that's all just kind of like a crash course in Freytag's pyramid. What we're going to be looking at today is we're going to be figuring out what can be our inciting incident that can launch our novel forward in a way that inspires us to write. For me, I'm going to share the two inspiring incidents for me. So I already told you that I was sort of inspired by this mass bird death. And so I translated that into the very first sentence of my novel, Archaeopteryx. With this sentence, one day 10,000 birds fell dead from the New Mexican sky. And so that launches forward this whole plot to explore why and how this mass bird death happened. I'll share with one other inciting incident with you from my other book I just finished. So this book, Sick at First Sight, is about a woman who works in the county morgue, in Hennepin County morgue. She's processes bodies, basically. And one day, the body of a migrant, undocumented girl comes in, and this propels her journey forward to figure out what happened to this girl, how she died, and who is responsible. So the inciting incident is really that moment where things launch forward. And we can draw from our own lives to create these inciting incidents. We can also just make them up. We're novelists, we're fiction writers, that's totally fine. But a lot of times you find stuff in the real world to inspire the novel. So what I would like you to do next is I want you to reread what you wrote about the experience that moved you. And I would like you to use it to write the first sentence or sentences of your novel. What is the inciting incident that makes this novel explode forward? I'm going to give you a couple, maybe 2 or 3 minutes to write that, and then maybe we can share a few if anybody feels like sharing. Does that sound fun? Let's do it. Okay, so go ahead and take 2 or 3 minutes, come up with an inciting incident expressed in a sentence or two. How we all doing? Does anybody want to share their first sentence that they came up with? Anybody feel like reading this inciting incident that's gonna inspire this novel?
I kind of have an idea for my third book, but I'm still working on my second.
Do you want to read us the sentence that expresses your inciting incident?
Yes, and what's inciting about it is it's a change from the protagonist's previous thoughts.
So this is a sequel to novels you've already written.
Yes, it's
Okay.
this will be the third one in an 8-book series.
Hit us, we're ready.
Okay. The marble floor stained with evidence of each murder turned Kala's stomach, but still, each Terraconan had a choice: free their captives or die. She wouldn't give in to her people pleasing anymore.
All right. That sets up a lot of suspense. It tells us something about the character. Doesn't it make you guys want to read more? I'd read that book. It sounds great. Anybody else want to share what they came up with? Sharing is caring.
I
Oh,
can.
Amanda. Hey, Amanda. Thanks for coming and thanks for
Hi.
reading.
Yeah, it's good. I don't really know where this is going. I just looked at what I had written for what inspired me, and this is what came out.
Perfect.
Darlene, honey, I heard in my mother's unmistakable voice, her soft lilt smothered in a southern accent, even though she had been dead for 7 years.
Wow. Yeah. Lisa reacted positively to that, didn't you, Lisa? Yeah, we got some nods out there. That sounds awesome. It's so spooky, but also kind of beautifully rendered. Don't you think the that soft lilt gives it this gentle feel that brings you up short when you realize that a dead woman is speaking? That's great, Amanda. I think you should write that novel.
Thanks. I just have to figure out the rest of it.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's move on to the next phase here. So now that we've got our inspiration, we've come up with hopefully the inciting incident that moves our novel forward. Let's talk about the next thing to do, which is to come up with a protagonist. We want the protagonist to, first of all, fit the story. They should have attributes that will allow them to triumph, but also flaws that will allow them to fail. We want our characters to be rich, complex, interesting, repellent, attractive, all these things at once, so they're complete humans. We also want them to be people who are perfect for our story, and they should be arresting. And what I mean by that is that part of the hook, part of getting people to read your novel is that they love or are interested in this main character. They want to know what this main character is going to do. So they should be part of what hooks the reader. And they should also be one of a kind. They should be really original. So let's look at a couple of examples, and then I'll let you guys brainstorm your own characters. I'm going to bring up The Hunchback of Notre Dame again. The characters in that book are phenomenal. If you haven't read it yet, you really should, just as a character study. My favorite character from that novel is Quasimodo the Hunchback. He is physically spectacular. I didn't know it before I read the novel, but he's like magnificently strong. He's got the strength of a giant. He's incredibly agile. He'll jump from bell to bell like a monkey, but he's also deaf. He's also physically disabled. So he's got these flaws and these strengths that counterbalance each other. He's also associated with a prominent symbol of the bells of Notre Dame, which kind of give him his identity. One of my other favorite characters of the modern age is Katniss Everdeen. I think she's interesting because she's got these skills that make her perfect for competition in the Hunger Games. So she's the right character for that situation. She's also the right character for that situation because of her heart, because she is so caring and so kind and so fearless. So what's her name? Collins came up with just the perfect character to fulfill the promise of these Hunger Games books. And we can also see that she's got the symbol of the bow and arrow associated with her. So when we think of her, we think of this symbol as well. I'll share with you the protagonist from my first novel. He's inspired by this guy, Dharmendra Singh, who you see a picture of here, who is the tallest man in India. So I made my character a giant. He has giantism, so he was 8 feet tall. He had a lot of social ostracization because of that, but he was also a zookeeper. He had a vast knowledge of animals, which made him perfect for exploring the massive death of these birds. And he also has a pet tarantula, which is kind of his symbol. And in fact, when I get compliments on that novel, oftentimes people ignore everything except the fact that he had this pet tarantula. So never underestimate how important these little symbols, the things we give to our characters can be. All right. Why don't we spend a few minutes, maybe 4 or 5, doing a little writing exercise where you come up with your own protagonist. Now that you know what your story might be about, now that you have inspiration for it, come up with the traits of a protagonist who will fit your story. What are their skills? What are their flaws? What are their fears? What are their quirks? What's their name? Come up with some information about them, and that'll prepare us for the next stage. So I'm gonna give you about 4 or 5 minutes. How did that go for everybody? Do you feel like you got a little bit of your character figured out, your protagonist? Yeah, well, let's keep going. Hopefully you did. I want to share with y'all a little bit about how novels happen to me. So oftentimes I feel like I don't do my writing. My writing happens to me. Like I'll start thinking about a character, and then all of a sudden these scenes just sort of explode out of me that are really short, but like I'll just see my protagonist interacting with somebody else or doing a particular thing, and they're just really short, almost splashes of scene. I'm going to check the chat. Am I a discovery writer or a plotter? That's a great question, Kara. Kara, first of all, tell us what the difference is. In the chat, Kara just asked, am I a discovery writer or a plotter? Let's let Kara tell us what the difference is between those two things.
Yeah, I've learned a lot about that. I'm mostly a discovery writer because when I outline, I get so annoyed because I just want to write it. So I typically write, and if I don't like something, I'll just edit it out later. Like I deleted 40,000 words from my first novel before I really got it right. Outliners are more meticulous, and sometimes it's just like simple, like, there's a Save the Cat writes a novel and there's just beat points. Discovery writers can use that too. But outliners that are purely outliners will just, they have their story and, scene by scene, even characters drawn out, locations drawn out, have like a story Bible where everything from like the book or series is in there. And they might deviate from that, but they at least have that checklist.
Right. Yeah. Well said. Well described. And I think that, we like to categorize things and say there's this type of person, there's this type of person, there's the plotter and there's the discovery writer. And those are really useful categories to think about. I think probably most people are a little bit of a combination. I think it's pretty clear to me that I am a discovery writer. Like, I can't plot everything out. I just have to sort of let it happen. And my writing is not, plotzer. And my writing is not linear. It happens out of order. But everybody's different. Everybody has a different process, and that's good. So this process might work better for some people than others. So I'm going to guide you through what I find to be really helpful in the early phases of a novel. And I like to call what we're about to do scene splashes. These are quick dips into very brief scenes that you write in sort of bursts as you're discovering the character you're writing about, as you're discovering the ethos of the novel, the voice of the novel, the setting of the novel, what other characters are going to be in there. This helps you start to develop your plot points too, because things happen in these little scenes that start to make the plot form. But really these scene splashes are methods of discovery, mainly about your protagonist. How do they react when they're in certain different situations? So like this last novel, I started with this scene splash where this corpse rolled into the morgue where my main character worked at. And then all these other little scenes just started to splash out at me as I was just hanging out in my life. And I just started to write it. And eventually I had enough scenes to put together about half the novel, and then I plotted the rest of it out. So these little scene splashes can be really helpful in getting us inspired to write our novel and in helping us to get to know our new character. So let's practice a few. Yeah, somebody wrote that they usually know the end, but not how they want to get there. That's you, Amanda. Yeah, what's his name? Jonathan Irving, is that a real person? Maybe I'm getting his name wrong, but what he would do is he would write the novel from the end back to the beginning. So he'd write all the scenes backwards. Maybe that's what you should try sometime, Amanda. John Irving, thanks Luna for being better than me and smarter than me. Yes, John Irving is the guy who I'm talking about. So yeah, but let's go ahead and try this process for today. So I'm gonna give you prompts, and they're gonna be little like 2 or 3 minute writing prompts. And we'll just write these little splashes over the next 10 minutes or so and see what comes out of it. See what you discover about your protagonist. So here's the first one. Take 3 minutes. Write how your protagonist responds to this. Write it in scenes so it's like a slice of movie for the reader to experience. I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes. Scene splash number 2 coming your way. 2 or 3 minutes on this one. Let's do another one. Your protagonist runs into a person they really like, but they're on an urgent mission. Let's go to the next one. Let's skip that one. Let's do this one. Your protagonist eats their favorite meal. All right. So that was the last scene splash that I had set up. I thought I would leave like 5 minutes for questions, comments, discussion, questions about writing a novel, sharing problems you're having with your novel or whatever. Does anybody want to engage in any of these things? Question asking, comment making?
I guess I was curious. Also, hi, Dan.
I know.
And I was curious in terms of like how because I know you said like, your head kind of works on stuff even when you're not writing, like stuff just kind of comes to you. In terms of making memorable characters, like how do you take kind of a concept that's come to you and turn it to something that feels kind of fully fleshed out? Do you have like a process for that?
Could you clarify what you mean by that?
Like, do characters come to you in your head kind of fully formed, like they feel like people, or do they come as like kind of one idea and then you have to work on them?
That's a great question. I think a lot of times characters come to me through these little scene splashes. So I'll be working with my protagonist and they interact with a person, and that person sort of gets born in action. And I have to do a lot of development of those characters and of all my characters. I think that maybe I just don't have that natural gift that some people have, but I know that when I was in graduate school earning my Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, my first year, my advisor told me, Dan, this is your weakness. You need to work on character development. And so I just put a ton of time into it and into developing characters. And I think that writing scenes, which is the lifeblood of fiction, helps develop characters, but we can also, do brainstorming sheets, character profiles, all that sort of stuff, but they're definitely not in my mind fully formed. And even so sometimes people also take real people from their life and sort of transmute them into characters in fiction. And I think that's fine. We all do that. But I think even then we need to develop those characters so they're suited for the fictional world and are not loyal to the real world, if that makes sense. What do you think, Noah? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. I think like the emphasis on scene is really helpful, like just kind of developing characters through, surprisingly, their actions. So yeah, that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense.
Yeah, I cannot say how much I believe in that. I mean that the scene is the most powerful thing we have at our disposal as fiction writers. And if you have faith in the scene, it does so much for you. Kara, hit us.
I'll hit you. So when you get towards the end of your process, do you use beta readers before you submit, before you publish, and do you use advanced readers once you're ready to publish?
So that's a great question. When I'm finished with a project, I do give it to beta readers. Generally, I have some trusted friends who are also writers that I give it to. Like one of them is Tom Maltman, who's a professor on our campus. But I also like to give them to lay readers, people who are not writers, people who just enjoy reading, because they have really invaluable feedback too. I think that generally once you get a publisher, the publisher will arrange for those advanced readers, and that's what happened with my book, is that they did that for me. So lucky me. Anybody else? Question, comment, problem?
Did you work with an agent or?
That's a
How did
great
you get published?
question, Amanda. So my first book, I was trying to find an agent for a long time, but it's an odd book. It doesn't really fit into a genre category really neatly. So agents, though many of them liked the manuscript, they couldn't see which publishing house would take it. So as I was querying agents, I also, and one of them called it weird. One of them like, your book is weird. I don't know if we can do anything with this book, Dan. So I started to just search for publishing houses and agents that liked weird fiction. And I found this publishing house that I really liked and just sent a letter to them directly. And within a month, I had an offer to publish the book. So most people use agents, and that publisher is now out of business. That's life. So now, now I'm back at square one and soliciting agents, and I think that's the tried and true way to go. But sometimes you can get lucky and go straight to a publishing house. Yeah, good question. It's not fun. Like writing is fun, but doing the business side of it is not fun. We're at 1:50, but I think we have time for another question if anybody has one. Any of these wonderful people I haven't gotten a chance to meet before in my life, we'd love to hear from one of you. Or not.
I have another one if no one's going to ask.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thanks.
So, you know, I think I would imagine a lot of us here haven't actually like finished a novel. I know some people have, like Kara, nice job. That's the goal. But was there anything that kind of like, was there anything that you didn't realize would be so difficult, or you didn't realize you would struggle with until you finished your first book? Like something you didn't expect that was difficult that you only realized after you actually finished a project?
Yeah, trying to remember. Yeah, I have an answer to that, which is that one thing I didn't expect. So writing has always been really joyful for me. Like I love it. I love sitting down and I love writing. I love the creativity. I love the language. I love all of it. I think at a certain point, once you hit the 3/4 way through a novel, bye, thank you, have a great day to you too. Somebody just let so. Once you're at that 3/4 point through your novel, I think it's at that point that it starts to feel like a slog, because you have to fit all these pieces together. You have to write the scenes that you know need to exist, but that you're not inspired to write. You have to figure out how everything can line up perfectly and how there can be transitions and connections between all these parts. And it starts to feel like work rather than play. And that is the part that has challenged me in finishing some of my projects. Not anymore, like now I'm sort of used to it, but my first couple novels, I was like, I want to work on a different project. And that's what a lot of writers do. They finish like 3/4 of a project and they're like, this isn't fun, I'm going to start a new one. I have writer friends who have like 3/4 of novels and they've never been published. And that's why. It's because they forget that writing is hard work as well as fun. Thanks for that question, Noah. Hey, and thanks for everybody for coming today. It was really fun. I hope you got something out of this. Now go write your novel and let me know how it turns out. Have a great day, y'all. I'll see you later.